Let's take a small break and talk about a very important thing in modern web design: responsive web design. You have probably heard of it by now. So, in this lecture, we will set up our project so that we can easily build a responsive website. So, what is responsive web design? Building a responsive website means that that website will work well on any device and with any screen resolution. Working well means that that website is easy to read and to navigate without needing to constantly zoom in and zoom out, which is really annoying. Here are just two examples of responsive websites. You can see that they change with the browser's width, which means that they respond to the screen size, therefore the name responsive web design. According to Google, 50% of all internet traffic already happens on mobile phones, and this will even increase in the future. In fact, Google recently announced that mobile-friendly websites will be ranked higher on their search results page. So, it's really important to embrace responsive web design right now. So, there are three main ingredients to responsive web design. First is the fluid grid. In the fluid grid, all layout elements are sized in relative units, like percentages, instead of absolute units like pixels. In the CSS section, we used a static layout and defined width with pixels. Now we are leaving that behind and work with percentages. We will set up this fluid grid in a minute. And the same goes for images, so as to prevent them from displaying outside their parent elements. And finally, media queries allow us to specify different CSS rules for different browser width. With media queries, we can target different devices like mobile phones and tablets and make the website respond to their screen size. So, now that we know the main ingredients to responsive web design, let's go back to brackets and set up the fluid grid. We will then build our website using that grid in the next lectures. We will take care of the media queries part later, after building our web page. While we build the web page, it's just important that we always use the grid. Now, the fluid grid we will use in this course is based on this little responsive grid system, which claims to be spectacularly easy responsive web design. So you can build any layout you can imagine with this fluid grid. I actually made some changes that makes things easier for us and compiled everything in one file. Please go download that file from the lecture description right now. We will come back to this website later so I can show you how that grid works. So I hope you downloaded the file by now. I actually already have it here on my desktop, so I will copy it. And then we put it in the vendors folder, because once again, it's a file that we got from the internet, and then in the CSS folder. And here we go. All right. So now, back to brackets, let's include that file. I'll do it here. Again, before the style CSS, which is our CSS file. And let me just tell you another trick, which is I can, since I don't want to write all of this again, and instead of copying, which is a little annoying, I can just do duplicate, which is Command D or probably Control D on Windows. So right here, just Command D, and here we go. Because all I want to change now is this file. So I want the grid file. Right. So now the grid file is included in our project. Now let me show you how that grid works. So on this website is a little example. So all our content will be inside columns, as you can see here. And each of these group of columns is a row. So in each row we can have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 all the way to 12 columns, which all have the same width. And now as for the responsive part, if we resize the browser window, all of them shrink. And that means that they are defined with a relative width, because their width is always relative to the browser window. So they get smaller and smaller as I decrease the browser window. And that's what responsive web design is all about. And after a certain amount of width, they even stack. So when they get too small, we can't see any content in this column here, right? Then they will all stack, just like this. And our website, since we will use this grid, will do the same. Okay, so let's see the CSS file that we just included, and it's down here. Let me just open it. And if I click it twice, double click, then it appears up here in the working files. So we have a row and columns and then different spans. And each of these span will be a column. For example, this span 1 of 2 is just these columns. But don't worry, we will use that in the next lecture, and then you will understand everything, just how this works. Alright, let's get back to our HTML file. And as I said, the content will be in rows. So let's just define the row. I will simply call it row. And what I want for this row is a maximum width of 1140 pixels, just as we used in our previous project. So this is the only value that will have an absolute value in pixels. We will define all other layout margins and paddings in percentages and not in pixels. And now I also want to center this row on the web page, so all our rows will be centered. So do you remember how we did that? We'll just say margin, and then to center a container inside another container, as you remember, we set the left margin to auto and the right margin to auto. And you probably also remember that we can use a shorthand to set margins, just like this: top and right and bottom and left. Alright? But there's an even simpler way of doing this. So let me show you that as well, which is we can say 0 and auto, and then top and bottom will be 0 and left and right will be auto. So let me delete this, and now this row will be centered. We can just try this out. So I'll say div and class will be row. Alright, just put this here, and let's see how this looks like. Okay, you see it's perfectly centered. So now we have everything in place, so we can start building the first section of our web page, which will be the header. So don't wait and join me in the next lecture.